Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Book Week Scotland with On Five Libraries. Just a few housekeeping items to mention before we start. So your microphone and cameras will remain off, but I'm sure you will want to ask Shaun lots of questions. So please use the Q&A button that you see on your screen. You can also use this button to have a taste of the Random Book Club. So just put your name forward with a random fact, and then for anything else, use the chat button. Shaun Bythell owns the Bookshop in Wigtown, Scotland's largest second-hand bookshop. It has over a mile of shelving and contains over 100,000 books, which, as a librarian, sounds like heaven to me. In Diary of a Bookseller, you mentioned that on the whole, booksellers dislike librarians. So Shaun, I'm really hoping will be the exception to the rule tonight. So my first question, or possibly two, is how did you get into the second-hand book trade, and why did you decide to write your first book?
Well, first of all, can I apologise for being rude about librarians? We don't dislike librarians. We dislike, as second-hand booksellers, what you guys do to books, which is generally to put stamps and all sorts of things on them, which makes them almost unsellable. But yes, in answer to your question, I never really intended to become a bookseller. It was more, I kind of fell into it more accident than design. So I grew up on a farm about a mile from Wigtown. And I was visiting my parents at Christmas one year, and I called into the bookshop in Wigtown, which had been John Carter, the guy who set it up, who I bought the shop from. It had been going for about 20 or 30 years, and I always used to drop in, and I called in to say hello to him and buy some books, and we got chatting, and he asked me what I was doing with my life and where it was going, which was pretty much nowhere. So he said, why don't you buy the shop? Because he was about to retire, and I told him that I didn't have any money, and much as I'd love to run a bookshop, I couldn't afford to buy it. And he said, you don't need to worry about that. That's what banks are for. And he turned out to be right. So I went to the bank in Newton Stewart's, nearby Market Town, and the bank manager foolishly lent me the money to buy the shop, and I'm still paying it off. But it's great. And, you know, it's the best thing I could have done. I can't imagine where I'd be if I hadn't taken that sort of leap of faith and chosen to buy the shop. But yeah, it's been a really fantastic experience, and I don't regret it for a moment. And I look at a lot of my friends who are have chosen to have, I suppose, what you'd call a more conventional career, and they're probably considerably better off than I am, but I wouldn't trade what they have for what I have. I just love it. Every day brings something different. Sometimes it's something horrendous, sometimes it's something wonderful, but you just never know what you're going to get.
So from going from getting the bookshop, what made you decide to kind of venture in and write your own book?
Well, I think everybody who's ever worked in the shop has, and anybody who's probably worked in retail full stop, but probably particularly bookshops, will tell you that every day brings the most bizarre encounters. So everybody who has worked in the shop has more or less said, we should write a book about this. And it's always been in the back of my mind, but my memory is so atrocious that I just I got to the point where I thought, if I am ever going to write a book about this, I'm going to have to start taking notes on a daily basis. So that's kind of what I did, and I just started keeping a diary, and eventually I didn't really know where to take it next. So I had, because we have the Wigtown Book Festival every year, I know quite a few people in the literary world, so I just emailed somebody, Jenny Brown, who is now my agent, and said, I've written this thing, I don't know what it is really, but would you mind having a look at it? And she did, and she very kindly and very politely told me what needed to be done with it, which was quite a lot of work, and eventually we sort of hammered it into shape. And I actually have to thank Jen Campbell, who, I don't know if you know Jen or know of her. She wrote a book in 2012 called Weird Things Customers Say in Bookshops. And I think every bookseller, probably every librarian as well in the UK, read it and thought, damn it, that was the book I was going to write. Jen did it, and it's a great book, and but it did sort of motivate me, because I thought I was getting a bit complacent. I thought, well, I'll get round to it eventually. And the fact that Jen had done it made me think, right, okay, now I've got to do my version of it. So thank you, Jen. Yeah. And if you haven't read Jen's book, it is really great, and there's a sequel as well. So they're both really good books.
So the Irish Times said about your diaries that they're one of the funniest and the honest books you'll ever read. So I was wondering, you mentioned lots of people in your books, like Granny and Nicky and Bumbag Dave, and I wondered how they felt about your honesty. How did they feel about being in the books?
Oh, well, first of all, I didn't realise the Irish Times had written that, and I'm immensely flattered. Yeah, on the whole, this is a question that comes up kind of fairly regularly, is that, how honest have you been about the people who are in the book? And in some cases, I do disguise them. So, I'll say that they came on a different day, or were wearing different clothes, or I'll change them from being a man to a woman, or right, okay, whatever, just because if I think someone's going to be offended, I will make a small effort, and I have to say it's a pretty small effort to disguise them. But on the whole, I think, do you know what, if people are going to be rude to you, then you're perfectly entitled to put that into print and kind of expose them for that rudeness. And I think one of the things that I feel like I'm doing is like holding a mirror up and saying, look at your behavior, and if you're uncomfortable with that, then don't behave in that way. But yeah, actually, to be honest, Bumbag Dave was the one person that would take exception. So he boycotted the shop for about a year. But yeah, unfortunately, he's started coming back again. So
well, that's good. He's a returning customer then.
Well, yeah, and he to be fair to him, he nearly always buys something. He's really interested in aviation. So, but now that he's started coming back again, he's just been complaining about the quality of the aviation section. Oh. So as well as asking me about what time the bus to Newton Stewart is, which for some reason he thinks I ought to know.
So I was surprised when I was reading how far afield you will actually travel to get stock for the shop. And I was just wondering, what's the most kind of unique or interesting book that you found and brought back?
Well, those two things don't necessarily go hand in hand.
Oh, right,
so
okay.
the furthest I've gone, was Portugal. So
okay.
So I drove the van down to Portsmouth and picked up my friend Rob, and we drove to Portugal and cleared a house there, which was it was quite an unusual experience because it. Should I bore you with this? I probably, well, too late. I'm going to. So I got a phone call from a woman who had been. I think her husband had been in the Foreign Office or something, and they lived all over the world, and they decided to retire to Portugal, and basically bought this bungalow, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. I can't remember the name of it, and so they retired, and then her husband, as obviously quite often happens, died shortly after he retired, leaving her on her own in a place where she didn't really know anybody. So she moved back to London and bought a flat there, and phoned me up and said, we need to clear the house. And so Rob and I drove over there, and the house was obviously every heroin addict in the town had broken in and stolen things, but the one thing that they hadn't stolen was the books, and the books were by far the most valuable things. So we loaded up the van with books and left. But in answer to the other part of your question, probably the most valuable book that I've ever come across is this is going to be really annoying as well. Somebody brought in a 2-volume set of books by Aubrey Beardsley, who was sort of late 19th century writer and illustrator. And I didn't know what they were worth, so I paid him about £800 for them. And then somebody came in and bought them, and about a year later, the guy who'd bought them came into the shop and said, do you remember that set of Beardsley that I bought from you? And I said, yes, of course. And he said, yeah, I just sold them for £19,000. Which was a little bit galling, and mainly because I feel like I kind of shortchanged that customer. And I had no intention. If I'd sold them for that price, I would have, I'd have reimbursed him and made sure that we were on a level playing field financially. But and again, in answer to your question, giving you several answers to the same question, the most I've ever sold a book for was a set of Audubon's Birds of America, which is like one of the holy grails for booksellers. It's a 6-volume set. It was originally published in Edinburgh, I think, by Lazars. And I sold it for a family friend, so I took a tiny commission for it, but that made 37,500 at auction.
Wow.
I wish
your friend was pleased.
Yeah, my friend was pleased, and it's nice. It's really nice to to be exposed to a book or a set of books like that, because it's so rare that you actually see them. That it's a real real pleasure and a real privilege.
Yeah, and to get to handle them and actually kind of, you know, get your hands on them.
So beautiful, all hand colored.
Yeah,
hand colored illustration. But apparently, Audubon, J.J. Audubon, the guy who wrote the book or produced it, was he's sort of heralded as this kind of great naturalist because he documented all these like really almost every type of bird in America. But in order to do it, because he was an artist and he couldn't, sort of scribble down illustrations quickly enough, he ended up shooting thousands and thousands of birds so that he was able to mount them and illustrate them. So there's a sort of slightly
dark history to it.
Yeah, exactly. But it is one of the holy grails of book selling. You always want to get your hands on a set of Audubon. That's the only one I've ever come across. Although when I was in New Zealand a couple of years ago, so the set that I had was octavo, which is about that size. Oh, can you hear a screaming child? The set that I saw in New Zealand was elephant folio, which is huge. So that's the really rare set. So that's the one that's worth millions, because the plates are so beautiful.
So the exciting news is that you've had a new book come out at the beginning of the month, 7 Kinds of People You Find in a Bookshop. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about it.
It's quite a short book, and oddly, like the diary we were talking about earlier just sort of evolved naturally. That was kind of, that's how I found myself sort of writing, but my publisher asked me to give my readers a break and do something different from the diary. So they asked me to do 7 Kinds of People You Find in Bookshops, which I have to say, because I didn't feel it was coming from me in a way that, like, the diary just kind of, it just sort of wrote itself. And Sue Townsend always, if you ever read, she did a brilliant interview, the Adrian Mole author. She said that an interviewer asked her why she wrote in the diary format, and she just said, well, it's really easy. You write a day, and then 7 days later you've got a week, and then 5 weeks later you've got a month, and then that's it, done. And I kind of, that I have a great deal of sympathy with her about that, because I feel that that's obviously not for everybody, but for me that's a sort of natural way of writing things. It writes itself. Whereas 7 Kinds of People, I struggled a little bit with writing it. I mean, it was just getting my head around the idea of it not being a diary, I suppose. And as soon as I got into it, it was fine, because there aren't just 7 kinds of people. There are thousands. Every person who comes into the bookshop is, you could write a piece about them. It wasn't, I found it more difficult, but it was quite good fun to write.
So have you had any kind of feedback about the book from anybody? Can you give us some examples of one of the people who we might find out of the 7?
I think probably the first one, and the one that I probably enjoyed writing the most, is the expert, which is generally the person who comes into the shop, probably not really wanting to buy a book, but just to sort of exercise their intellectual muscles and tell you how clever they are. they're probably the most, maybe not the most annoying, but they're definitely among the most annoying kinds of people. And on the whole, they just want to make you feel inferior. And feeling inferior is something I'm quite used to. So it doesn't really bother me hugely when they come in. But yeah, there is a type that definitely comes in that makes you want to, the purely there to exercise their intellectual muscles and at your expense. But at the same time, there's a sort of flip side of that, which is that you do get people coming in who will share their knowledge and experience with you without doing it in a way that's deliberately calculated to humiliate you. So those are the sort of people that I love those customers, and the other kind of customer that is there to just try to make you feel stupid. They're the two sides of the coin. One's brilliant and one's just horrible. On the whole, I have to say my customers are great, and it's probably the same in the library. Generally, most people are really kind, really polite, really friendly. It's the ones who are rude that you tend to remember at the end of the day when you're locking the door. You don't think about all the polite, kind, friendly people. You tend to remember the few who've been rude.
So I think you've shown that you need to be creative to be in the book trade. So I wondered if you could tell everybody about the Random Book Club and how it came about.
Yes, I'd be very happy to. So in 2008, when we had the credit crunch, we took a massive financial hit, and actually there's a kind of, I'm really sorry if I'm going to bore you with this, but I bought the shop in 2001, and up until 2008, one of the things that I noticed was that we always ran out of £5 notes. So I always had to go to the bank and get £5 notes. And then after the credit crunch, I was just inundated with £5 notes. Not inundated, but I noticed that everybody was paying with much smaller denominations. So before the credit crunch, everybody would pay with a £20 note, and I'd always have to give out £5 in change. But after the credit crunch, it was a completely different story. So now it's kind of, that balance is slightly redressed. But we did take a huge financial hit after the credit crunch. We went back down from, so when I bought the shop in 2001, turnover basically went back down to what it had been there, having grown steadily every year. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to do something. So I decided to create the Random Book Club, which is you subscribe, and it's, God, I have to increase the price, otherwise I'm going to go bust. So it's basically £5 a month, and you get sent a book, but you've got no idea what you're going to get. You can't dictate, you can't email me and say I want fiction, or I want history or military history or whatever. You just get what I choose to send. So it was great. It kind of basically bankrolled me out of bankruptcy. So it was a difficult time, and because I pitched it at a price where I wasn't going to make a huge amount of money out of it, or almost no money out of it. I've kind of looked at it as a loan from customers. So that's more or less what it's been.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's grown into a monster now, and it's become really difficult to manage.
Well, we've actually just had. I was about, sorry, we've just had a question come through, and they're asking, is it still on? Is the Random Book Club still working, and can you join?
That's sort of yes and no. It's still going, but partly because of lockdown, I wasn't able to go out and buy books.
Yeah.
So
mm-hmm.
It meant that everything just got put on hold really for about 3 months, and I'm still really catching up.
Mm-hmm.
And I have closed it to new members, but apparently there is a way around it. If you go onto the website, I don't know how to do it. I wouldn't advise to do it, but there is apparently you can still sign up. But at the moment I'm really not looking for new subscribers, because I've just got so much on at the moment.
It's too popular.
They're too popular. Yeah. I hear myself saying that I'm a victim of my own success. But,
So I thought we'd just see if there's anybody there who wants to have a kind of a go and see how the Random Book Club would work. I thought I would kick off just to say, so a random fact.
I completely forgot that you'd asked me to do this.
So it is going to be random. You're surrounded by books and it's going to be random. So my really random. So my random fact is that I have a very sweet tooth.
No, I would have to go and get Chocolat by Joanne Harris. And I should have organised this and had it piled up.
Uh-huh.
But yes, I'll try. If I can see anything within reach that fits the bill, see what I can do.
Yes, and we've had somebody else who's come through. Jen has said that she likes cake and cats, and I believe you have a resident cat, do you not, in the bookshop?
You do have. I actually got 2 resident cats.
Oh, 2 now.
Captain. Mm-hmm. Captain is. He quite often puts in an appearance, but I haven't seen him for a while. So yes, we've got a huge cat. And if you're looking for a book about a huge cat, then definitely The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, which has a huge talking cat.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the funniest books I've ever read. It's brilliant.
Mm-hmm. So let's see if we've got anybody else. Go through. Oh, Yvonne's random fact is that she likes indie music.
Indie music, then definitely you've got to read Nick Hornby. Oh God, what's the name of the book? I can't remember what it's called. But it's all about.
It's all about
High Fidelity. That's it.
That's the one. That's the one.
I'm really sorry. I should have been armed with all these.
All the books surrounding you. That's okay. I won't put you on the spot anymore. You did very well there.
No, carry on.
It's fine. Yes. So let's see. So actually, I think we should perhaps open it up and give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions. So we'll see if any have come through on the Q&A. Have we look? There we are. Oh, so who would you like to visit your bookshop? And it could be someone from the past, the present, or the future. Because you've had quite a few famous people come in, or famous authors.
Does it have to be a real person?
They haven't said if
actually, that's one of the things. Okay, so that's one of the things about our book festival is that above the shop in my drawing room. We turn it into the writers' retreat, so that all the writers who come to our festival, we sort of wine and dine them upstairs. So I have got to meet some really kind of well-known, famous people over the years, but I'm quite shy, so yeah. I generally avoid them. I go into the kitchen and clean plates and things while they schmooze in the big room. But it's I had probably the most memorable, and I was slightly hesitant to say it was. We had 1 year we had Ian Paisley. And it was in the early years of the festival, so it was just him and a couple of his mates, and I made some soup, and we all sat around the table, and he had these two guys in suits with him as well, and I was just, because I was so nervous, I didn't really know what to say to him, so I didn't really speak to Ian Paisley. I was chatting to these guys in suits, and it turned out that they were security. It's kind of quite in this. So I said, "Oh, blimey, do you guys ever get to carry guns?" And one of them just went,
"Oh."
So yeah, it's an interesting time of year, the festival, but obviously this year it hasn't happened, so it's been I kind of missed it, and actually quite enjoyed not having to do it at the same time. But normally it's really great fun. It's really busy, and we have 200-300 events going on over 10 days, so so
is there anybody who you would love to have in your shop but you haven't had yet?
Oh, yeah. Oh God, that's a really good question.
Sorry.
I don't know. I would love to have Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Possibly not Donald Trump, but but we do regularly get sort of really quite high profile people turning up. So I've had Nicola Sturgeon sitting in that seat behind me
there.
So she dropped in about 3 years ago, it's funny that one of the things that I remember, I was talking about my friend Rob, who went to Portugal with me, and he's a writer. One of the things that he said is that very few people recognize writers. You'll always recognize an actor because you know their face, or a politician, or somebody like that. But writers tend to live fairly solitary lives, locked up in their offices, and there might be a picture of them on the dust jacket or the back of the dust jacket of one of their books, but you tend not to really know what they look like. So even really famous writers, I mean, I can, if Philip Pullman walked into the shop, I wouldn't know what he looked like. I wouldn't necessarily know it's him. I think you do tend to recognize people who are on the television, but not necessarily people who are well-known writers.
Yes. So we've had a few more questions kind of fly in. I don't know if you've got one of your books to hand, but somebody's asked Beverly has asked if you could read an extract. I don't know if you have any to hand.
Okay, if you can give me 2 seconds, I will run and get a copy of the first book and read a bit that I always like reading because it's about my friend Sarah. So if you, literally 5 seconds.
5 seconds. There we are. So I'm sure Shaun will be back, and it'll be worth the wait when he comes back with his book, and he can read us an extract from it, and we can get a wee taste of what's in the diary. Here he is. There we go.
Okay, so my friend Sarah, when I bought the shop, the guy I bought it from used to have a full-time member of staff, and then he used to employ students on Saturdays, and I kind of inherited one of them, who was a girl called Sarah, and I'm trying to find, she asked me to write a reference when she left the shop and started working, or was looking for a job somewhere else. So I thought, right, I'm going to be honest, because most people, when you're writing a reference, you tend to sort of give it a bit of a rose-tinted colour. So this is a reference for Sarah Pierce. Sarah worked Saturdays at the Bookshop, 17 North Main Street, Wigtown, for 3 years while she was at the Douglas Hewitt High School. When I say worked, I use the word in its loosest possible terms. She spent the entire day either standing outside the shop, smoking and snarling at people trying to enter the building, or watching repeats of Hollyoaks on 4OD. Although she was generally punctual, she often arrived either drunk or severely hungover. She was usually rude and aggressive. She rarely did as she was told, and never in the entire 3 years of her time here did anything constructive without having to be told to do so. She invariably left a trail of rubbish behind her, usually consisting of iron brew bottles, crisp packets, chocolate wrappers, and cigarette packets. She consistently stole lighters and matches from the business and was offensive and frequently violent towards me. She was a valued member of staff, and I have no hesitation. That's
very good. Thank you for that.
She was great. I love Sarah, and I still see her from time to time.
So we now have a question about your kind of routine as a writer. Maria wants to know, do you write in the mornings or the evenings? Do you have a routine, or is it just when the inspiration strikes?
It is generally as things happen in the shop, because my memory is so appalling. If I'm in the shop and customers come in and say something or do something, I generally write it down there and then. So I don't have a kind of routine other than that. And then I suppose at the end of the day, I do probably try and polish it all up a bit. But no, I don't have time set aside for writing. And I think it depends on what you're writing. I think if you're writing a diary, you just have to bang it out there and then as it happens. Otherwise, things just disappear into the ether, and you just forget about them. But yeah, I imagine if you're writing fiction or something like that, then you probably do need to put time aside, and it's difficult when you're working as well. So the shop's open, so it's not like I've got the whole day to just sit and think about what to write. So I'm working and trying to write at the same time.
Multitasking
or not doing it very effectively or efficiently, but doing my best.
We've now got an idea about a future book that you could possibly write. So the suggestion is that post-pandemic, would you consider writing a book about all the your kind customers and your heartwarming moments?
Well, do you know what? In my third book, I have made considerable references to.
There we are.
Yeah, and so we were closed for 116 days, and it didn't take me long to really start missing my customers. Even the miserable ones. I I kind of, that whole sort of human contact thing,
Yeah.
which everybody has that same shared experience now, but I really missed it. So I hope that in the third book there is a slight note of warmth towards my customers. And one thing I'll never forget is actually the day we were allowed to reopen. I opened the shop and there was nobody turned up for, I don't know, 2 hours. And then eventually someone turned up, and I'll never forget him. He'd driven down from Ayrshire. He spent about £80, and I almost felt like hugging him, just because he was obviously somebody who had missed the fact that he couldn't go to bookshops, and when the opportunity presented itself, he was straight in there. And I do hope that that's something that, and I don't know if it will happen, but as a consequence of lockdowns, I do hope that people will appreciate the high street a bit more. I don't know if they will. I think that the other side of that argument is that everybody's got so used to buying things online now. But I hope the high street will be a bit more valued than it has been before.
So Yvonne is asking, have ebooks have made a difference to the bookshop? Do you think readers will ever move away completely from real books?
No, I don't think they will. I think there's several elements to this, and one of which is that people are kind of almost, there's a display element to if somebody comes in house, people are quite proud of having books on their shelves. It's almost a way of defining your personality or your intellect or whatever. But yeah, there's that expression, I can't remember who said it first, but special room. So I think in a way, the physical object of the book is hopefully always going to have a life. And I think there was when ebooks sort of first appeared, publishers, I think, started to kind of raise their game a bit and made their dust jackets a bit more attractive, spent a bit more money on illustrations and production values. And I think that has also helped to ensure the future of the book as a physical object. And also ebooks, no, I'm probably going to get this completely wrong, but I think Microsoft had an ebook thing where you could buy ebooks from them, and then they decided to wind it up, and everybody who had bought an ebook from that Microsoft site suddenly lost their ebooks. You don't own them. Basically, you're renting them. Oh. So everybody who had spent, I don't know, £200 or £300 buying ebooks suddenly found that their ebook library was gone. So that's the difference between ebooks and physical books, is that you actually own them and you can resell them, whereas with an ebook, that's it, you can't.
So our next question is about TV and film. It's which books adaptations have you enjoyed the most when translated to TV or film?
Well, I don't really watch that much television. But one of the books I talked about in the diary, it was a book I happened to be reading at the time, which was a book that nearly all of my friends had said, you've got to read this book, which I have this sort of knee-jerk reaction. I'm not going to read it. The more people who tell me I ought to read it, the more reluctant I am to read it. But Any Human Heart by William Boyd, I eventually did read it, and it is the most beautiful book. And the television adaptation of it is equally beautiful. They did a really good job of it. So there you go. If I have to pick one.
Yeah, that's your favourite.
Thank goodness I could remember one.
So I think the Random Book Club has struck a chord again. So we have a comment saying, we're all looking for online Christmas presents this year. What about 6 months Random Book Club at £60? Perfect for at least 3 people I know.
Great. Okay. Well, I will try and set that up, because it's yeah. I suppose a book a month is actually, well, it's not that much if you're a real reader. It's you know, it's not a huge amount, but yeah, one every 2 months is
but I think
a good option.
Yes, yes. So it could be a good option, and people would get to experience the Random Book Club, and they'd get to have a book that is something perhaps new and something a bit challenging for them. So it could work for everybody. So something to consider, perhaps.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Whoever suggested it, if they want to come into partnership in business, then I'd be very happy.
Well, you might be contacted later. Somebody else is asking, have you received any weird or funny prezzies from your readers?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I got today, actually, I got a German Advent calendar. I'm trying to think if there's anything other than that. I get lots of postcards and things. But yeah, a German Advent calendar today that's in terms of the most recent correspondence. That's the best.
Yes, we've actually had, it's just come through on my phone here, we've actually had a lovely comment from Maria in Moscow. She said, just received the book today, got so overexcited, finished it on my commute. Massive thank you. 7 kinds of brilliant.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a lovely comment.
It was great. So the first book has been translated into, I think, about 25 languages, but it seems to have done really well in Russia. It's funny, yeah. You kind of never really know what. I suppose it's partly down to the translation. So it must have been a really good translator, but yeah, you never really quite know what's going to where it's going to do well and where it's not. But yeah, both. Yeah, thank you, Maria. I see that.
Yes. Yeah, and she's saying that it's gone viral.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems to have done really well in Russia, and the first one did quite well in Italy. And I remember I went to a book festival in Italy about 2 or 3 years ago, and I had supper with my Italian publisher, and I was speaking to the translator, and she said, I was like, well, why do people in Italy, why are they interested in a small bookshop in rural Scotland on the the west coast of Scotland? And she said, oh, we think it's incredibly romantic. And I'm thinking, well, a vineyard in Tuscany for me is. So I suppose it's just something different. It's just an insight into somebody else's life.
So we've got time, I think, for a couple more questions. So if anybody has any more, just quickly pop them through. Somebody's interested in hearing about what you're actually reading now.
What I'm reading now is, do you know when we went into lockdown, I thought, this is brilliant. I'm just going to read non-stop. And I did exactly the opposite. I was halfway through, or nearly the end of reading Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, which is admittedly a fairly hefty book.
Yeah.
I was about 50 pages from the end, and by the end of lockdown, I was about 40 pages from the end. So in 3 months, I read about 10 pages. But I am currently reading, and just really ought to have finished it, and a book called Rereading Steps by Arnold Bennett, which is, I'm quite into reading books about bookshops and booksellers, and it was recommended by Charlotte Higgins, who writes for The Guardian, and she told me I have to read this book, and it's really, really good. It's very funny. But I've got past the stage where the guy who owns the bookshop on Rereading Steps, which is this sort of made up place in London, has died, and I kind of think, no, I'm not interested in it anymore. I just want to find out more about the bookseller. But no, it's a very good book.
So we have another question through saying, do you have several books that you have on the go at the same time, or do you focus solely on one and then move to the next?
I read one book at a time. I don't have the capacity for concentrating on more than one thing at a time. And there's a sort of element to that question, which is, I suppose, do you ever reread books? And I don't. I always think of it as almost like a wasted opportunity to discover something new. So I don't know about you, but
I have to say it's very rare that I reread a book. I'm a bit like you. I think there's just so many wonderful opportunities out there that I
exactly. There's so
yeah.
The only book I reread recently was 1984, which I read just before lockdown again, and the last time I read it, which is sumptuous, and was actually in 1984. But it is a brutal book, but it does bear rereading, but it's extremely hard work.
Right.
And I love Orwell. I think he's one of my favorite authors.
So you've just mentioned lockdown, and we have a question about that. What will be the first thing you're planning to do when the lockdown, or all lockdowns really, are over?
Well, we're not under lockdown in this part of Scotland. We're still trading. So I suppose, I guess like everybody, you just want to go somewhere,
yes.
go somewhere else. Travel. You know, I love where I live, and I love my house, my garden, everything. But yeah, it would be really nice to just, you feel like you've been chained down, and you just want to break out and do something different. But yeah, I think I don't know. Christmas is going to be an interesting time this year. But yeah, it would be nice to just. I really, given the opportunity, I would just love to go up the west coast of Scotland and go to the Western Isles, and just be somewhere different.
Yeah.
Even in the winter, I think it's it's just something that makes you feel like you aren't trapped.
This is probably going to have to be the last question from the audience. What would you say is the book that every teenager should read?
Oh my, no question, Catcher in the Rye.
There we are, the easy one.
Yeah, well, easy for me because that actually is one of the few books I've reread, and it's just, I think I just read it at the right time. I think I read it when I was a teenager, and it just completely struck a chord. It was just it's so well written. And Salinger, I mean, I've read is it Frankie and Zoe and Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenter, his other books, but nothing comes close to The Catcher in the Rye. It's just fantastic.
So one last question from me. This year's Book Week Scotland theme is future. And as we've kind of been touching on tonight, this year's been like no other and has been extremely challenging. So I wanted to know kind of how you see the future for the shop, and also perhaps what's coming up in your own future, because I believe the books have been picked up for a television series. I don't know if that's true.
Well, they've been optioned by a TV production company, but to be honest, I'm not hugely optimistic that it'll come to anything. I think TV production companies tend to option book rights mainly to stop other people optioning them. So I suspect it won't happen. As for the future of the shop, because Wigtown is a book town, that we've got several bookshops in the town, and I think it makes it a tourist destination, and I think and hope that will continue and it will grow. It's difficult to predict again what the future holds for the high street, but I think we're in a reasonably safe, strong position where we're never going to be rich, but hopefully we can all survive. And I think that's the sort of ethos of, not the ethos, but the idea behind the whole book town is that you create a critical mass where you've got 7 or 8 bookshops, and it brings tourists to the area, and it's worked. So it's taken 20 years to get to where we are, but fingers crossed we're now in a safe place.
I'll pick up again. Fingers
crossed, yeah. I mean, it's always this time of year is always diabolical. I think we took £26 today in the shop, and it's like that really from now until March. But once, hopefully, by the time we get to March, fingers crossed, things will have changed and we'll be back to normal.
Well, I want to thank everybody who's come along tonight and for all those wonderful questions that we've had. And also, Shaun, thank you so much for taking time out and talking to us. It's been a real pleasure having you here. I was about to say in Fife, but it's kind of virtually here. And to the audience as well, just to say that after tonight's event, you'll have access to the Scottish Book Trust audience feedback form. And so they would love to hear your feedback. And also you have a chance to win one of 2 £250 vouchers. So thank you for coming along tonight, everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.